Delegate Lutke, House Bill 690. You can. Have Carlene Spitulnik, Beatriz O'Keefe, Kyle Potter, and Jenny Ravel. And after Delegate Lutke, I recommend that Ms. O'Keefe be the next to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 690 is a version of bill which veteran members of the committee are very familiar with. We passed a version of this bill unanimously out of the House last year, ran into some challenges in the Senate, but we are bringing it back because we believe that this is one of the best things we can do to support students across the state of Maryland. Because reading is such a basic element of a child's education that it is central to every other subject, central to everything they do throughout their academic careers. We know that if a student is not reading on grade level by third grade, their chance of graduating high school declines, their chance of attending college declines, their chance of ending up in the criminal justice system increases. It is absolutely essential that we get reading instruction right. And so this bill asks, and you know, the debate with the Senate last year got very complex because there are some technical points in the bill. But fundamentally, all this bill asks is that we screen every kid in the early grades to identify any reading difficulties, including but not limited to dyslexia, to identify any reading difficulties they're having and then intervene. It is a basic thing that, frankly, our school system should already be doing, but they're not all doing it. And so we need this bill to make that happen. And without further ado, I will turn it over to the star of the show.
Beatriz, it's very good to see you again today.
Hi, my name is Beatriz O'Keefe. I'm 10 years old and I'm in the 5th grade at Piney Branch Elementary School. In 1st grade, it was impossible for me to read. Everyone was ahead of me. All my friends were on higher reading levels. They were reading chapter books and I was reading picture books with little words. I felt mad and angry that I could not read. When I was in 2nd grade, my parents didn't understand why I could not read, even though my teacher said I was a great student and I would eventually catch up. But I didn't. My parents took me to a test. We found out that I had dyslexia. At the beginning of 3rd grade, I started to take tutoring 3 days a week after school. Tutoring was hard, but it was also good because it helped me to learn to read. I got a lot better at reading. I took tutoring in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. The principal of my school didn't think I would ever catch up, but then this year I finally caught up. I worked really hard, harder than everyone else, and if I had been able to learn to read during the school day, I would have had more time to do after-school activities and homework. I am lucky that my parents got me tested and I got tutoring. It is really expensive and there are families in my school who do not have the money. And that is not fair that they do not learn how to read. I think it would be better for kids to get screened for reading problems earlier, so it would not be as hard for them to read and they will not fall behind. They will get the help they need sooner than I did. Please vote for the Ready to Read Act so all kids can get help. Thank you.
Beatriz, thank you so much. You did an excellent job. We're really glad you're here today. Thank you for coming. Carlene Spitulnik.
Chairman Kaiser and members of the committee, my name is Carlene Spitulnik and I'm here to support the Screening and Intervention Bill, commonly called the Ready to Read Act. I represent the Ready to Read Act Coalition, which includes groups concerned about poor reading outcomes in Maryland. The bill was drafted by school psychologists, Maryland teachers, and parents. There are 2 drivers behind this legislation. First, responding to parent and student testimony in 2015, the legislator directed a task force to meet and determine how to address dyslexia in Maryland public schools. After 2 years of research, the task force recommended adopting a prevention model using universal reading screening that would address all students who may struggle to learn to read before they fall behind. The students who will benefit the most from screening and early interventions include English learners, minority students, students at risk for reading difficulties like dyslexia, students exposed to or living in poverty, and students with dialectical differences. The second driver is public school personnel, who said they were tired of special education meetings where students were already 2 to 3 years behind in reading. Most students were not screened for reading difficulties or provided early effective reading instruction and interventions, like explicitly and systematically address foundational reading skills. Last year, similar legislation passed the House unanimously. On sine die, a conference committee version ran out of time before the Senate could vote. In preparation to reintroduce the bill, the coalition studied the conference language and determined that it was inadequate because it did not include the science behind universal screening. A screening instrument must be valid and reliable and must assess pre-reading and early reading skills that research shows are highly predictive of a child's later reading outcomes. Dr. Potter, a school psychologist, will address that component of the legislation, and Jenny Ravel, a reading specialist in Baltimore County, will describe how screening and early effective reading instruction benefits students and schools. If each school district screens students each year in pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade to see if students' reading skills are intact, we will ensure that all students have the opportunity to learn to read. As the Kirwan Commission interim report acknowledges, the parents and educators will attest, the majority of our students are not reading on grade level. It's time for Maryland to implement an early warning system to support reading success, and that system must include reading screening and foundational reading instruction and interventions. When we address students' needs early before they fall behind, we give educators the tools to equitably determine which students need targeted supplemental instruction before they fall behind. For these reasons, we request a favorable vote.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again. Dr. Potter?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kyle Potter. I'm a practicing school psychologist, and I'm a board member of the Maryland School Psychologists Association, or MSPA. MSPA is a professional organization representing about 600 school psychologists in Maryland, and I'm here today to voice our strong support for House Bill 690. As a school psychologist, I provide services across many areas, and the area where I spend most of my time involves evaluating students. School psychologists are often tasked with evaluating struggling students to help school teams determine if they qualify for special education services. These evaluations often include cognitive assessments and diagnostic reading assessments, among other tests. One of the main reasons MSPA supports this bill is because, as research shows, it is often the case that by the time students are evaluated through the special education process, they're so far behind that even with specialized instruction, they will struggle to catch up. Students who fall behind in reading are at risk for secondary negative outcomes, including emotional concerns such as poor self-esteem, anxiety, and depression, as well as behavioral difficulties that may manifest both at school and at home. The solution to these problems is to identify students who may be at risk for reading difficulties early. The way to do this is through a universal screening protocol where every student is screened in order to catch as many at-risk individuals as possible. Screening tools are brief, easy-to-use measures that can be administered to all students in a relatively quick time frame. Screening measures should be valid, reliable, and have strong predictive power. That is, they should adequately measure the areas they are designed to measure. They should be accurate in their outcomes no matter who administers them. And they should be able to predict with as much statistical certainty as possible which students may experience reading difficulties in the future. Screening measures should also directly inform follow-up assessment and/or implementation of effective targeted interventions. The Ready to Read bill includes specific skills such as phonological and phonemic awareness, letter naming, letter sound identification, word reading fluency, and oral reading fluency. And these are all skills that are included in the bill because research demonstrates they're highly predictive of future reading success. The Ready to Read bill's screening requirements follow basic principles of effective assessment while allowing enough flexibility to school systems to select screening tools that best fit their specific needs. MSPA believes that enacting the provisions of the Ready to Read bill will improve frontline reading instruction, tiered implementation of effective interventions, and improve our students' reading outcomes, all while reducing referrals to special education. For these reasons, MSPA stands in strong support of House Bill 690 and respectfully asks the committee for a favorable vote.
Thank you very much. And Jenny Ravel? Thank you.
Hello, I come before you today to ask you to consider the importance of early screening for all children. A quote by Maya Angelou speaks to me after a very successful screening of this year's first graders. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, you do better." As the reading specialist of a 1st through 5th elementary school, I feel confident that my children are set up for success thanks to early screening. As a literacy leader of my school, I have used screening in the past, but it was always done in a vacuum, so to speak. Intervention did not always follow the screening, and progress monitoring was lackluster at best. This year, however, after taking courses to learn more about learning disabilities and to increase my knowledge of screening and interventions, I knew what I had to do. My goal was to screen every first grader in my building, to share the results with the teachers, to provide intervention through direct instruction, and finally, to monitor each child's progress. This has been life-changing for the students and their teachers. The screening I used is brief, yet yields much quality information. Several children were identified with deficits, and interventions were quickly put into place. These same children may have gone unidentified for months or years, and intervention would have come too late, if at all. Allow me to give you some examples. One child I tested was able to read and comprehend on a 2nd grade level, but the screening showed great deficits in phonological awareness skills. What this means is that eventually these deficits would have caught up with him when he had to decode multisyllabic words when he was older. At that point, however, no one would really know how to help him. Because of the screening, I was able to train the teacher in phonological awareness instruction, and she has provided the necessary intervention. His progress monitoring has shown growth in the deficit areas, and his reading skills have taken off as well. On the other side of the coin, I have identified children who are reading well below grade level. Those children have shown deficits in phonological awareness and rapid naming skills, and the teacher has been able to intervene for them as well. These same children would have met with continued difficulty in learning to read without this foundational knowledge. Once teachers, administrators, and others realize the power of the screening and early intervention, it would be a game changer for all who educate children. Unfortunately, sometimes educators in large school systems do not recognize a good thing until it becomes mandated. With the mandate would come professional development around screening that would then allow all educators to administer the screening and follow it up with intervention. House Bill 690 would be the encouragement that school systems need in order to reach all children, regardless of their socioeconomic background, race, or school placement. I encourage you to join me in doing better now that we know better. Thank you for your time and for your service to the citizens of the state of Maryland.
Thank you all very much, especially Beatrice. Any questions for the panel? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Delegate Lookie, for this bill. Oftentimes, people look at a fiscal note as to whether or not they will support it. So I'm asking you, or one of your panel members, how do you see the early screening, your House bill, offsetting the fiscal note that could be anticipated in the future?
Sure. From a fiscal perspective, if we don't catch these reading difficulties early, we often have to do much more expensive interventions later. A lot of kids that don't necessarily need to be will not necessarily need to be on an IEP if the interventions happen early enough. And as you know, special education is much more expensive. The fiscal note this year is significantly different than the fiscal note last year. For example, last year Montgomery County said they could do this for a little over $3 million. This year it's $16 million. The bill hasn't changed that much, so we're trying to figure out where that's coming from. We'll see where that goes. But I think it will save money in the long term, regardless of what the fiscal note says right now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Delegate Guyton.
I thank you so much for bringing this to us. I just have a question because the fiscal note is so large. Can you talk to why you've decided to do a universal screening of all kids rather than just looking at screening kids who seem to be having difficulties in the classroom?
Sure. Screening is meant to really catch as many kids as possible early. By the time we're noticing that they're struggling, as many of the panel already said, we have difficulty getting them to catch up. It requires sometimes more expensive interventions. It requires more intensive interventions where they're oftentimes being pulled out of class, missing instruction. We really want to just cast a wide net early, catch as many students as possible before they get to a point where we're really saying, wow, they're struggling in class.
Thank you.
Just really quick about the student that I was talking about. I screened everyone, and although he presented as a child who could read above grade level, the screening showed these deficits that are like hidden deficits that we wouldn't have known. Everyone thought, when I went to the teacher, she said, no, he's reading fine. He was actually in special ed, and the special educator had no idea. So that's why we wanted, like he said, to have this big net, because a lot of things are hidden and only screening can provide that information.
Thank you. Thank you. Delegate Riley?
In my opinion, okay, I think reading is the most important subject that the public school education or any school could actually teach and make sure that our students receive. Would you agree? Okay.
Well,
reading.
as a former social studies teacher, I might debate.
Well, yes, but if you can't read, they wouldn't be able to learn social studies. Reading, it comes back to reading because it's a form of communication and understanding. You need to learn how to read to even do mathematics. It all comes back to reading, and that's what kind of blows me away, that we don't put so much importance. It's taken this long to get this legislation through, because reading is, I do believe, is very important. And so, what grade level does the subject of reading actually end in our public schools?
You mean as an independent subject?
As an independent subject, yes.
So it varies a little bit by county, but for the most part, all elementary school students have an ELA sort of reading block. Many sixth grade students have a reading block. Mm-hmm. From then on, the type of reading instruction that happens is different. It's much more content focused. Mm-hmm. So there's still reading instruction that happens, but the assumption by certainly seventh grade, for the most part, is that the students have already developed the basic reading skills like phonemic awareness. And
so isn't that the importance of why we need to catch them at an early age and doing this in our elementary from pre-K, first grade, second grade? Because we can't wait until there's no other classes for them to learn how to read, basically. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Riley. Any other questions for this panel? Thank you all very much. I'm going to call up the next group while you're getting up. We have Sarah Davis, Adelia Davis, Rosemary Kitzinger, and Colin Kitzinger. All right, Ms. Davis.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Davis. I am the parent of 5 beautiful children. I am also the founder of Parent Advocacy Consortium, a grassroots organization supporting our children's civil rights. I have 2 children with dyslexia, and I have other children with other types of challenges. In 2017, Anne Arundel County Public Schools took my daughter with dyslexia to due process, spending more than $30,000 in order not to fund an evaluation that identified her dyslexia. She was 13 at the time. A very late identification for dyslexia, and well past the time point, as one of the delegates mentioned, when reading intervention and phonemic awareness and other foundational skills is even available anymore. As a result, we've been paying out of pocket $165 a week in order to have her remediated as a teenager. This is on a single income active duty military family paycheck, and the financial burden is real. In 2018, my youngest daughter, Adelia, was identified with dyslexia before she began showing signs of these challenges in school. As the previous panel mentioned, many of the foundational reading skills are not actually apparent in the early grades if a child is struggling in those areas. Anne Arundel County has also denied her supports for dyslexia, and we will be providing her the independent supports that we're paying for. And so I urge you to really consider this bill. This has real life impact on real life families. And Even if we bring evaluations to the school system that identify where our children are struggling because the school system themselves are not familiar with these particular tools, not familiar with the types of interventions that might be needed, we don't come back to a basis of information where they understand what we're talking about and can provide the appropriate interventions, and we're left on our own to provide those interventions for our children, for those of us who are either able or able to sacrifice in order to do that financially. So again, I urge you to pass this bill. Make sure that we are addressing the learning and reading needs of not just our special education students, but all of our general education students who deserve the right to learn effective reading skills at the age range and developmental period when that is appropriate for them, not waiting until they develop anxiety and other secondary problems because they're struggling with these initially hidden challenges around reading. Thank you very much for your time and attention today.
Thank you. And will Adelia be speaking?
My name's Adelia, and I have dyslexia, and I want to learn how to read. And please help me and kids like me.
Adelia, thank you. We're going to try to do something to help out. You are so brave to be here today. Thank you so much. All right, Ms. Kitzinger?
I'm going to go ahead and let Colin start first, and then I'll wrap up. Colin is my son, and he's a little nervous, so bear with him.
Okay, make sure the mic is a little closer. All right, good luck, Colin.
I know.
You'll be awesome.
Good afternoon. My name is Colin Kitzinger. I am 10 years old. Back when I was in my school running meet, I could never keep up with my work because I could never read the directions. This made me feel not so good. I was also bullied, which made me feel even worse. The teachers did not know how to help me with reading. Please pass the Ready to Read bill so other kids have the chance, do not have to feel the way I did. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent job. Congratulations. All right, Ms. Kitzinger.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Kitzinger. I'm a Carroll County resident. I am a mom of 4. Just a little background. In our county, for the first couple years of Colin's education in public school, I thought, he was a little behind on reading, a little behind on writing. And, everybody says, the teachers always say, don't worry, he'll catch up, he'll catch up, he'll catch up. And nothing was done. In 3rd grade, he was significantly behind at that point. We requested assessments from our county in addition to the assessments that we had already attained outside of the county because our school did not see a problem, so they did not provide assessments. The county school psychologist had told us that there was one certain assessment she thought would be good to assess Colin with, but our county didn't own it. So I requested an IEE, and the county chose instead to file due process against Colin because it's not against me, it's against the student. And we went through a 3-day due process where the county spent $36,578 to not assess my son for reading difficulties. So when we talk about a fiscal note and money and the long run, I'm sure the taxpayers, including myself, could have found a better use of $36,578. There is so much they could have done for him. What I learned on the 3rd day of due process from an expert witness was by the end of 3rd grade and 9 years old, it is nearly impossible to fully remediate these children. It is 4 times more difficult for them. I'm witness to this. My son is amazing and he's wonderful and he is smart and he tries so hard. And I see it and I see him try. But as a parent, I know that the school system and myself as a parent failed to early identify and early intervene. We are paying for private school now where they can give him the interventions that he needs. We are paying for tutoring. We are doing all the things that we can in our power. We are not rich. We are not a wealthy family. It is a struggle. There are many families who will never be able to achieve what we are achieving with Colin. So I would definitely like to see you pass House Bill 690, and I'm going to leave you with my little 2 cents thought. I'm a life member at Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad. I've been an EMT for many, many years. And in our world, it comes down to ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. Without A, you don't have B. Without B, you don't have C. Well, A is reading. Without reading, you don't have B. You don't have writing. Without reading and writing, you don't have C, which is a proper education. It just can't happen. And there is a golden hour that we know in the medical world of the time of opportunity for traumatic injury, heart attacks, and strokes, that golden hour to intervene and make the person's life better than it is. This is the golden hour of opportunity, is the early years. Let's not miss our golden opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all very much. Questions? Delegate Washington.
And thank you for being here, especially the young ones. Thank you for your bravery as well and just stepping up to the plate. And for many parents that go through the situation that you have. My mom, actually, one of my brothers had dyslexia, and going through that situation and trying to figure out how to help was a very difficult process, especially being in a low-income family and not screening them at an earlier age. I believe we need to definitely do that. Do you know how often that happens, your particular circumstance where the school system will spend money not to do the screening? And how often does that happen in the state? Do you know how often?
I don't know how often it happens. I did actually look at our special education budget in Carroll County alone. I highly recommend our delegates take a look at it too. We spend a tremendous amount of money. Our county budget is like $165,000 for attorney fees. We've gone over that almost double for several years, which says to me we're failing the children. That money could be better spent. I don't know. I also have parents who ask me to help advocate for their children because I'm passionate about it. And I sit in meetings where children are in middle school and high school, and the teachers don't understand why little Johnny or little Susie can't read their work. Well, when the assessments come back and say, you know what, they stopped learning these skills in third grade. They have a third grade level reading. They have a third grade comprehension. Well, how do we expect them to comprehend high school work?
Right. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you all again very much. And invite up the next two people testifying. We have Leslie Margolis and Buzzy Heddleman. Ms. Margolis, let me ask you a question. If it's not part of your testimony, can you start by answering Delegate Washington's question about the costs that families end up, or that school systems end up spending later in the process that we don't deal with earlier? Do you have any answer you have any data on that?
Yeah, I don't have the data. We can try and obtain that, but I don't have it at my fingertips. I'm sorry.
No problem. I just thought of all the groups here that the parents might not have it, but yeah. Anyway, if you can begin. Okay. Now we're starting.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and the committee members. I'm Leslie Margolis with Disability Rights Maryland. I also chair the Education Advocacy Coalition. You have the Education Advocacy Coalition testimony, so I'm not going to repeat it. I do want to say on behalf of Disability Rights Maryland and on behalf of the coalition that we represent numerous students who are of all ages, but we have lots of older students who are in high school, middle school, high school, reading at a first, second, third grade level. And these are students who have been in special education for years, have often the same individualized education programs year after year. They're often kids who are involved with the juvenile justice system, who are on the verge of dropping out of school, really facing significant problems. And the lack of reading instruction has been a huge barrier. And so I think this bill, if it passes, would really make a huge difference for our kids. And by the time they hit high school, if they could read, it would make a huge difference in their ability to access services. It might reduce the need for an IEP later on, but it also would change the services that they receive. And it would also help the teachers and the other staff who are serving them better serve these students. So we as Disability Rights Maryland and we as part of the Education Coalition strongly support House Bill 690. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Margolis. Mr. Heddleman, good to see you, my fellow commissioner on the Kerwin Commission. How are you today?
Fine, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am honored to serve on the Kerwin Commission with Chair Kaiser and Delegate Washington. I've also spent a lot of time in the trenches. I have over the past 20 years represented over 250 struggling learners, most in Baltimore City, but throughout the state. I've done this work pro bono, so I know what it's like on the front lines and in the classrooms. Let's face it, no one disagrees with the intent of this bill, but some folks express concern. Is this a new unfunded mandate? Will it usurp local control? Clearly, it is not a new mandate. I've listed in my written statement a number of laws, initiatives, state and local, that make it very clear that the state is already under obligation to teach all kids to read. But that obviously isn't happening because 60% of our kids all over the state are not achieving proficiency in reading. That's why this bill is necessary, because this bill sets out a widely accepted evidence-based framework that will enable these children to actually learn how to read. And this bill does not usurp local control. It states what are the crucial elements, the screening, the assessments, the interventions that are necessary, but it doesn't say which ones the local district should choose. MSDE should ensure accountability, much more so than it has in the past, but it should not prescribe or dictate any particular curricula or screening instrument as long as those are evidence-based. And what about the concern that the bill is an unfunded mandate? We on the Kerwin Commission sweated through that a whole lot, and our recommendations will go a long, long way towards paying the cost of the elements, the evidence-based elements in the bill. Our recommendations include $43 million in fiscal year 2020, next year, to get this started. This is a substantial down payment, and in future years, there should be reasonable implementation based on the availability of funding. And one very important point, which Delegate Lukey alluded to, and others, if this bill is enacted and implemented, we will save hundreds of millions of dollars in special education costs. 2/3 of students in special education would not be there if there were adequate pre-referral interventions. So thank you. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your support for the bill, if it comes to that.
Thank you so much. Any questions for this panel? Seeing none, I'll call up the next two proponents, Stacy Gillette and Rebecca Evans. Thank you both for coming today and joining us.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Stacy Gillette. Chairman Kaiser and distinguished members of the House. House Bill 690 states that reading failure is likely to lead to limited employment opportunities and difficulties with basic life activities. With this in mind, I was alarmed to discover that at some of the elementary schools in Anne Arundel County, less than 30% of fifth graders are reading at grade level. I have to wonder how the remaining 70% are expected to perform in middle school, and if some of them can even graduate high school. Documentaries like 13th come to mind with their daunting statistics about school-to-prison pipelines. Education equals opportunity. I have the privilege of being the site coordinator at Georgetown East Elementary School for the volunteer-based organization STARE. STARE is an acronym for Start the Adventure in Reading, emphasis on start. STARE volunteers work one-on-one with second grade students who, when they came to us this October, could barely read. I've seen the look of pride on a child's face when he can identify and define words he could barely pronounce just a few months ago. I've seen children move from reading books with 4 or 5 words per page with extreme difficulty to reading small chapter books with ease. These children come to us with expectation and leave with the feeling of accomplishment. In June 2017, only 8% of our school's rising second graders could read at grade level. In June 2018, after many of them had completed a year of our STAIR tutoring, 68% read at grade level or above. I'm not here to advertise or promote STAIR, but to drive home a point. One-on-one personalized reading instruction is extremely effective. I've seen it and I live it every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. A level of trust is established and fear of failure is transformed into pride over slow but steady progress. Unfortunately, programs like ours are only a part of the solution to the reading crisis in our schools. STAIR, as successful as we are, only works with second grade students. These students need further instruction, further personalized instruction. Bill 690 proposes that beginning in 2020 to 21 school year, each county board shall ensure that a student screened to identify if the students have risk for reading difficulties. I wholeheartedly support this. In fact, I was surprised it hasn't been done already. I clearly agree with Bill 690 when it states that the long-term effects of early reading difficulties can be devastating. I cannot fathom arguments against the passing of this bill. Our children deserve the opportunities it will ensure they receive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Evans?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Evans. I'm a mother of 4. My son Tyson is a 6th grader. He's 13 years old and he's in the Anne Arundel County school system. My son reads at 48 words a minute. This is up from 24 words a minute. His processing speed is less than 0.2%. Tyson was evaluated by Hopkins and diagnosed with a specific learning disability in reading, math. He also has Tourette's and ADHD. However, the school has refused to provide any accommodations for my son for reading disabilities. They claim that he does fine in the classroom and he doesn't need any help. We requested that the school reevaluate my son. Their tests came back to state the same thing. My son has problems with fluency, processing, and executive function. However, the school said he still doesn't need help. I asked, how does 48 words a minute not affect you in the classroom when all your peers read at 150 to 180 words a minute? How does processing speed of 0.2% not affect you when it takes you more than quadruple the time to even understand the question that your peers understand immediately? It affects him every day. When we go to a restaurant, my son can't read the menu. He can't figure out what he wants to eat before the waiter comes back. When we drive down the street and we ask my son to find a street sign, he can't read the street signs before they pass. When we play a board game at home, he requests his siblings read the playing cards because he's embarrassed to read out loud. How can this not affect him in the classroom when it affects him every day at home? But since there's no standard screening tools for the schools, the school can choose to ignore my son's disability in favor of subjective grades and their opinions. For 2 years, we've attempted to get accommodations for my son. Finally, with no options left, we filed for due process and we lost. The judge cited good grades once again, and the fact that my witnesses had not observed him in the classroom and that nullified their testimonies. My son is now failing. He's getting D's and F's, and the teachers are emailing me telling me he can't keep up. My son doesn't cry. My son had open heart surgery and didn't shed a single tear, but my son is coming home from school crying and telling me he can't keep up with his friends and he's stupid. I have no way left to help him. A standardized screening test could have prevented this. Please help kids like my son. There are many of them across the county who need help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Appreciate you coming today, sharing your testimony. Any questions for this panel? Thank you both very much. Mr. Willems?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, here today to testify in opposition to House Bill 690. May participated actively in the deliberations on similar legislation last session, but I know for many of you, this is a new bill and a new subject to consider relative to legislation. I want to emphasize really 3 points. One is that this legislation represents an unprecedented level and degree of specificity with regard to really multiple elements of what we do as public education service providers. The instruction, the screening, the response to the screening results and interventions, and the type of screening implement used, all specified in great detail in the bill. Perhaps not as detailed as the legislation is introduced last year, which we do recognize and appreciate, but still an unprecedentedly specific and prescriptive amount of detail relative to virtually anything else you'll find in the education article related to what we do in the school building and the classroom on behalf of students. And so that does distinguish this bill, notwithstanding the merits, and can certainly take nothing away from the impassioned testimony you've received. And clearly the broad support is evidenced by the extraordinarily large number of co-sponsors for this bill, which we also recognize. What else sets this bill apart is that each local school system has its own curriculum and approach to reading instruction and reading interventions. And so the statewide blanket uniformity of the legislation is also of great concern. I will commend Mr. Hedelman for his service on the Kerwin Commission and have great respect for his expertise in this area, and certainly appreciate more now than I would have before hearing his passionate explanations of the value of tutoring. But I will say that the fiscal note does point out that the extraordinarily high fiscal note relative to this bill is commensurate with the analysis that was done in the Kerwin Commission. And we've yet to see a penny of the Kerwin Commission, $3.8 billion in recommendations. MABE is vigorously advocating for a $200 to $325 million launch this year and a significant amount of mandated funding next year. But that this legislation, with fiscal notes of $17 and $19 million per jurisdiction, does present an extraordinary cost as well as an unprecedented amount of intrusion into the work of local school systems on behalf of students. And for those reasons, we request an unfavorable report on House Bill 690. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems. Questions? Delegate Lukey.
John, thanks for being here. Just an hour ago, I was saying very nice things about you.
Is that changing now?
No, I mean, I do have some questions, and I appreciate that the stance of the boards is don't dictate details to us, right? Don't engage in prescriptive, legislation. And, I agree with Mabe on that a lot of the time and take a lot of heat from my colleagues for not passing their bills telling you exactly what to teach in every grade every year. But this is an issue we've been talking about for 4 years now, between last year's bill and the work group. And this type of screening is clearly the research-based best practice. So can you tell me how many of your members' systems currently engage in this type of screening because it's research-based best practice, and how many don't? And what has the change been over the last 4 years? I ask because I agree with you that we shouldn't dictate the details of things so long as the school systems are doing what they should be doing.
Delegate, I do not believe that any system is engaging in the universal screening of all students by grade level as prescribed in this bill.
Okay. We screen students for hearing difficulties, right?
Yes.
And that takes place in schools?
Yes.
And we screen students for vision difficulties, right?
Yes.
And that also takes place in schools. Do we still do scoliosis screening in schools?
No.
We stopped doing that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Delegate Riley.
Hi, Mr. Williams. Good to see you. Just easy question, simple question. Do you think that someone needs to know how to read to be successful in life? Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next bill.